So the cutoff had me covered. I counted up my stack. I still had 88,800 behind, which is 59 big blinds. It is quite a big shove. However, given the action and being heads up in these positions, I thought that this was a good chance that it could be a big flip. And so I do decide to take this spot at this stage of the tournament. After spending the past week living in Prague, my run in the main event at WSOP Europe had come to an end. But now it was time for the GG Millions High Roller, one of the biggest events of the series with a buy-in of 8,400 euros. I was soon back, ready for another opportunity for a deep run. So I decided to start right at level 1 with the blinds at 300, 500, 100k starting stack, 60-minute levels. The denominations for the colored chips are different than the main event, so just real quick, the turquoise is 100, the pink is 500, yellow is 1000, brown is 5000, and green is 25,000. In the second hand of this tournament, a huge pot developed right away. Seat 7 and Seat 8 both have ace-king and get it all in pre-flop. They do end up chopping the pot, but it is important information to see that these two players are ready to go with ace-king for 200 big blinds on level 1. So first hand, I'm in the hijack and look down at 4-5 of spades. The player under the gun in seat 1 opens to 1200. I make the call. It folds around to the small blind, who folds, and the big blind calls as well. We go 3 ways to the flop of 3 of spades, queen of hearts, ace of spades. The original raiser makes a c-bet of 1600. This is a huge flop for my hand as I flopped a flush draw as well as a gut shot to the straight. But with that said, this flop heavily favors the pre-flop raiser's range. I decide to just put in the call. The big blind gets out of the way and we go to the turn, which is the 6 of spades. I hit the flush right away on the turn. Now the original raiser decides to check. It's time to build a pot. I think my opponent has quite a few strong hands in his range that can continue here. I decided to put out a bet of 5k. He doesn't take too long before putting in the call. The river comes the queen of spades, now putting 4 spades on the board. My opponent checks, and now with this card totally killing my action, and now possibly losing to hands like ace-king with the king of spades or ace-jack with the jack of spades, I decide to check back. And he turns over ace-3 of clubs for 2 pair. So a very costly river, as he definitely would have called one more street if the river was a blank. The blinds are up to 300, 600. This hand I'm in the big blind and look down at ace-10 offsuit. It folds around to the button, who opens to 1400. The small blind folds. Now against this specific opponent, I'm definitely 3-betting here. Up until this point, this player was playing almost every hand with a super high VPIP. I put in the 3-bet to 5,000. And I wasn't surprised when he decided to make the call. The flop comes 9 of diamonds, 4 of spades, 8 of spades. With just ace high and a backdoor straight draw, I decided to start with a check. The button decides to check back as well. The turn is the 3 of hearts. Here I decided to make a delayed c-bet of 5,300. If he has any other combination of the Broadway hands, king queen, king jack, I'm hoping to fold out his equity with this bet, while also charging some of the straight draws that he could have. He does decide to put in the call. The river comes the 4 of diamonds. I check. At this point, I don't see any reason to bet. If I was ahead on the turn, I'm very likely still ahead on the river. And my opponent decides to check back. And ace high takes it down. It would have been interesting if he did decide to bluff this river, as there's not too many combinations of hands he could represent. I think facing a reasonable sized bet, there's a good chance that I would have to make the call. Next hand, I'm on the button and look down at king queen offsuit. Everybody folds to me. I raise it up to 1500. The small blind to my direct left decides to put in the call. The big blind decides to put in the 3-bet to 6600. The action is back on me. Now with the added dead money from the small blind just calling pre-flop, I think the big blind is way more incentivized to raise light, and holding king queen, I am blocking some combinations of strong hands like ace king, pocket queens, and I think putting in another raise here is superior to calling. So I do decide to put in the 4-bet to 17,000. The small blind gets out of the way. The big blind thinks about it for a bit and eventually decides to call. We go heads up to the flop of 4 of diamonds, 3 of clubs, 6 of spades. The big blind checks. And now having missed this board completely, I think I need to consider checking here. I don't have any backdoor draws, and the fact that he was able to call my 4-bet out of position makes me think that his range is weighted towards strong made hands. I think if he was making a play with a weak hand like Ace-X or King-X, my 4-bet would have folded out those hands. So I do decide to check, and the turn brings the 5 of clubs, now putting a one-liner on the board. The big blind checks again. It's quite difficult for me to represent anything by betting here. I decide to check back. The river is the 9 of spades, which is of no help. And so when the big blind makes a small bet of 12,000, there's not much I can do here except to fold. It does seem a little bit weak to just give up with king high starting from the flop, but I do think that it's important to not just blindly c-bet and not have a plan for the rest of the hand if I do get called. And if you think your opponent's range is weighted towards stronger hands, sometimes it's better to conserve your chips for a spot where you think you have more fold equity. Blinds are up, 400, 800. I'm in the cutoff with pocket jacks and raise it up to 2,000. The button to my direct left makes a 3-bet to 7,500. Both the blinds get out of the way. I have 67,000 behind. The button does have me covered. I can either choose the 4-bet or just call. This time I decided to just call. The flop comes 3 of clubs, queen of spades, 4 of hearts. I check it over to my opponent, who decides to put in a c-bet of 5,000. Facing just one overcard to my jacks, I have an easy call. The turn is a beautiful card, the jack of diamonds, now giving me a set of jacks. I set the trap and check again, but unfortunately the button decides to check back. The river is an interesting one, the 10 of hearts. Ace-King does now complete a straight, but after he decides to check the turn, I think his hand is weighted more towards hands with showdown value, hands like Ace-Queen, pocket kings, hands that he might decide to now value bet the river after I check twice. So I decide to get tricky here and check again. He thinks about it for a bit and eventually does decide to put in a bet of 9,000. Based on our positions and the line he took, I think it's unlikely he has Ace-King and even less likely he has pocket queens. I definitely have to go for the raise. I decided to check raise to 26,000. This does make him think for quite a long time. With me checking twice, he probably does feel quite suspicious, but he does eventually find the correct fold. Blinds are up, 500, 1,000. At this point, I'm back up to about the 100k starting stack. I'm under the gun and look down at pocket jacks again. I raise it up to 2,400. The player in the low jack makes the call. The button also decides to call. Small blind folds, and the big blind decides to call as well. So playing 4 ways with pocket jacks is not ideal, but here we are. The flop comes 5 of clubs, 9 of hearts, jack of clubs. The big blind checks. Suddenly playing against 3 opponents with pocket jacks doesn't seem so bad anymore. With top set and 2 players behind me left to act on a draw heavy board, I decided to check as well. But neither player takes the bait, as the low jack does check and the button checks back as well. The turn comes the 8 of hearts. Now multiple straights are possible, as well as a backdoor heart draw. The big blind checks again, and now with so many draws on the board, it's time to stop slow playing. I throw out a bet of 6,500. The low jack quickly folds, but the button decides to make the call. The big blind folds, and the river is an ugly one. It's the queen of spades. Now any 10 makes a straight. I decide to check it over, and my opponent does decide to put in a bet of 16,500. So not a massive bet. Facing this size and playing against this specific opponent, I do think I can consider calling. He's definitely been playing a high enough VPIP where he could have either combination of the flush draws, both of which have missed. And also I think with his size, there is a possibility that he could be value betting 2 pair. I do decide to throw in the call, and luckily for me, the button turns over 8-4 of clubs. So he had a busted flush draw, but turned a pair of 8s that he decided to turn into a bluff. So it turned out that playing this hand 4 ways ended up working out in my favor as I drag in this big pot, and I'm up to 125k after this hand. Blinds are up again, 1k, 1.5k. I'm in the cutoff and look down at Jack 10 of clubs. For those that know me, this is one of my absolute favorite hands. I raise it up to 3,000. The small blind folds and only the big blind makes the call. The flop comes 6 of hearts, 5 of clubs, 4 of spades. The big blind here decides to lead for 2,500. Both of us recognize that this flop is more favorable for the big blind's range than my opening range. However, I do have 2 overcards with a backdoor flush draw, and the big blind doesn't necessarily have to have 2 pair or better to be leading here. You could be deciding to lead with any pair or with a hand like 7x, 3x. So I decided to target that range and put some pressure on by raising it to 7,000. The big blind thinks about it for a bit and does put in the call. The turn comes the 4 of clubs, now giving me a backdoor flush draw. The big blind leads out again, this time for 6,500. There are now some possible full houses on the board, but that's still very few combos. I do decide to put in the call to see what develops. The river is the king of spades. I'm left with just jack high, and the big blind decides to bet out a third time. And this time for a very tiny amount of only 3,500. This small bet actually took away any incentive for me to want to make a play here. It really appeared like my opponent is trying to induce a raise. Here with just jack high, I think I can just cut my losses and move on to the next hand. Next hand, I'm in the big blind with pocket tens. It folds around to the cutoff, who raises to 3,500. The small blind folds, and here with a hand as strong as tens, I put in the 3-bet to 13,000.
5, 4, all in.
So the cutoff had me covered. I counted up my stack. I still had 88,800 behind, which is 59 big blinds. It is quite a big shove. However, given the action and being heads up in these positions, I thought that this was a good chance that it could be a big flip. And so I do decide to take this spot at this stage of the tournament. But unfortunately, he turns over pocket queens and has me crushed. His queens do hold, and GG. The good news is that registration is still wide open for this event, and with the blinds relatively low, I do decide to fire a second bullet right away. So the story isn't over yet. I'll see you guys back here in the next one with a continuation of this GG Millions High Roller Tournament. Still plenty of more hands to come. 喜欢我的影片，不要忘记按赞、订阅、打开小铃铛。